Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. John Shaw, welcome. I hope you have an opportunity to get your hands on the videos from yesterday, so that you can catch yourself up. In general, we talked. It was an introductory type of session. We talked a little bit about ourselves, obviously, and then what we did with the module that we covered yesterday is what we've got up on screen today. Um, we talked about business analysis in general, and who does business analysis. We talked some about the IIBA. Obviously, as a CBAP, you're familiar with the IIBA. I introduced the Agile extension to the body of knowledge, and then we talked about why people are doing Agile, why Agile has become a popular framework for doing at least software development, and in fact that it's becoming a popular framework for doing more than just software development. Talked a little bit about the AAC, which is the IIBA's interpretation or its focus in the Agile environment. It's slightly different than some of the other focuses. In particular, the IIBA looks at it from a more agnostic way. It's not about a particular framework for doing agile development. It's about understanding the underpinnings of the agile movement and why people have migrated towards a more adaptive methodology. It mentions some of the specific agile methodologies, but it doesn't focus on one. I did say that we have a tendency, I think this is true of virtually everybody who talks agile, we have a tendency to equate agile with Scrum because Scrum is the most popular flavor of agile. It's very accessible as a framework, very straightforward and simple as a framework, and it is the methodology that's been implemented in probably half of the agile implementations right now are running Scrum. So we will tend to migrate towards Scrum terminology, but the overall goal is to understand that we really want to be considering the underpinnings of Agile and how it applies to software development in particular, but really to any project. And then we talked a little bit about earning the what it's going to take to earn the actual certification, the Agile AAC. I did want to couple of the things that I wanted to mention yesterday that I kind of glossed over. We talked about certifications, and in particular the AAC. The AAC was implemented in March of 2018. As of the end of August of 2019, there are about 230 AAC certified individuals in the world. Of those, LN was number 87, and I'm number 107. So it's a small certification. To give you some comparative figures, the ECBA, which is the certification, the entry-level certification that the IIBA introduced in the latter part of 2016, there are 2,400 ECBAs currently. And the other two certifications, one of the figures is very interesting. The CCBA, which is the lower level of experiential certifications, was introduced in 2011, and there are only 1,450 CCBAs approximately. And the flagship certification from the IIBA, the CBAP, was introduced in the latter part of 2006, so it's about 13 years old, going on 13 years old now, and there are about 9,800 CBAPs in the world. To contrast that a little bit further, One of the other certifications that certainly is very well known and very well respected in the world is the PMP certification from the Project Management Institute. PMP was introduced somewhere in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Don't have the exact date, but at this particular point in time, there are 932,000 certified PMPs. So that will give you just a little idea of where the IIBA and its certifications sit in comparison to the grandfather, which is the PMP. Excuse me. I don't have actual numbers on them, but PMI also offers two certifications. One is a business analysis certification that they introduced in 2014 that is sort of competitive with the CBAP, and they also introduced an Agile certification. It's the PMI ACP, Agile Certified Practitioner. And the thing that I wanted to point out about that particular certification is that is more in line with the experiential requirements. Excuse me. With the experiential requirements, the ACP requires 2,000 hours of project time, 1,500 hours of agile project time, and 21 hours of training. So its requirements are similar to things like CCPA and CBAP. That pretty much covers what we talked about yesterday. I did want to give everybody an opportunity to, if you had any thoughts or comments or questions about the stuff that we covered yesterday, I did want to take a couple of minutes to cover that today, so that we could reinforce any issues or any thoughts you might have had about yesterday's material. Does anybody have anything they want to
So,
toss on the table?
yeah, what's the level of AAC compared to all those certification which we have from IABA?
In terms of the number or in terms of the type of certification, or can you clarify that a
Type
little?
of certification. Type of
Numbers?
certification, not no, not number. Type of certification. So, what's the level of this certification compared to CBAP, CBAP or CCBA or entry level C?
If I understand your question correctly, the AAC is designed for people who have a small amount of experience. IIBA says 2 to 3 years of doing agile project work. Um, that is, they kind of look at CCBA probably in the same level. CBAP assumes approximately 5 years worth of work. So that's the basic level of experience that they're talking about. Does that help?
Yeah, so it's an entry level certification. So AAC is entry level certification.
Uh, it would, yeah, that would be my take on it. It's intended to be slightly more than that. It's kind of in the middle because in terms of what you need to know to pass the certification, it would be very similar to looking at the ECBA. What the ECBA expects you to know about Babok is kind of what the AAC expects you to know about the Agile extension. Uh, they do recommend, IIBA recommends a few years of experience doing Agile. Um, that's that's kind of where they're looking at it. So in that sense, it would be more similar to CCBA. So it's kind of a in the middle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have anything from the materials we covered yesterday?
This is Don. Can you
Yep.
hear me? I'm just testing my mic and all that.
Yep. I can certainly hear you clearly. I hope you can hear me.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If nobody has any questions, we'll put this module away and we'll go on to the next one. So what we're going to start to talk about today is some agile concepts. Again, we want to get a very firm grasp on the high level information here because the goal ultimately is for us to be able to be agile as opposed to just knowing how to execute one of the agile methodologies. So we'll be talking about concepts, and we'll be talking some about how those concepts apply to whatever types of projects you're doing. The module objectives, we're going to talk specifically about Agile Business Analysis. This is a relatively short module. We're going to talk about the underlying principles of Agile Business Analysis, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about how specifically business analysts would seek to execute Agile Business Analysis. So, what is Agile Business Analysis? This graphic on the right hand side is really kind of nice. It's an kind of updated version of what Agile is about. A little bit more than some of the other kind of graphic illustrations of Agile. It really talks about some of your basic principles, which is focusing on people, focusing on delivering value to the people that you're developing solutions for. It talks about adaptability, experimentation, doing things, trying things, and seeing what works. And it talks about, as it says, make safety a prerequisite. I think that speaks to the idea of building quality into your solutions, always being concerned that you're doing things in the correct way, the best possible way. This is from the Agile extension. It's a simplistic way of looking at Agile business analysis, but it really captures the essence. It's simply doing business analysis in an Agile framework with an Agile mindset driving how you do your analysis. Agile and Agile business analysis certainly are intended to improve on your delivery speed. I talked yesterday about one of the concepts that people have a tendency to apply to Agile, saying we can deliver things faster, we can deliver our projects faster. And I said that that was a bit of a misleading statement in that Agile development doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to complete your projects faster. What it does do is to say that you will be able to deliver value to your customers faster. So that in an Agile framework, you're not looking to deliver an entire product en masse. You're looking to deliver pieces of the product that will deliver value to the customer as quickly as possible. Now, that's not to say that if you have a small project, and Agile can certainly apply to projects of any size. If you had a small project that was, for instance, a minor enhancement to an existing application, or even a medium-sized enhancement to an existing application, then you might conceivably ultimately deliver the entire product at the same time. But the goal would be to determine how much is reasonable to do in a reasonable period of time and deliver that. To take that apart just a little bit, in an Agile environment, you're not necessarily delivering product continuously because organizations frequently have constraints on their ability to make modifications to the production environment. There are a lot of organizations that will say, no, we only do releases to production monthly, and monthly would be enthusiastic. In many cases, it could be quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. depending on the magnitude of the application and the complexity of the environment. I can remember doesn't speak directly to Agile, but I can remember uh, riding on the subway in New York and looking over my shoulder and seeing someone who I guess was a project manager or something of that sort, happened to be working for Citibank, and the person was reviewing a schedule that basically it was a delivery schedule, and they had to notify the production the production people, the implementation people, several weeks in advance before they could even consider delivering. Even if they had everything in place, there was a delivery schedule that involved a couple of weeks of delay that they would have to go through before they could do anything in the production environment. That is not particularly unique to Citibank. It certainly was a little bit unique from my perspective compared to the company that I was working for, where we just assumed that when we finished doing our development, it was going to be installed to production effectively immediately. And for the most part, that's what happened because we were a relatively small, relatively young company. In a lot of environments, that's not true. So to take this back to the agile environment, as people are moving forward in an agile environment, they are looking at producing solution elements and verifying and validating those solution elements with their customers, but there is a strong possibility that those solution elements will need to be aggregated into basically what amounts to an increment that can be implemented in a production environment. Did somebody want to have a comment? Nope. I
The
thought.
Citibank example is how many years ago?
Excuse me?
Citibank example which you give is how many years ago?
Oh, wow. I have to say it would be at least 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more.
Yeah. So that is past, right?
That is the past. I don't know. I certainly don't know how Citibank implements at the current time. I don't really know anything about their development environment, but I do know it was just an example that for larger, more complex organizations, more heavily regulated organizations, the idea of migrating solution components from a development and testing environment to a production environment can involve reasonable chunks of time.
Mm.
The last consulting contract I worked on, I worked for an organization. We were dealing with SAP and a major product lifecycle management tool. Particularly in the SAP environment, they had a monthly release schedule for things, and you had to be your information had to be with them and completely vetted at least a month before it would be implemented in the production environment. So you had to submit and have everything verified and validated at least 4 weeks before it would be implemented in production.
Right. Just a little comment on that. The company I work for now, we work in the lending space, basically for leasing.
Hmm.
And so we do 2 week sprint cycles, which means basically right after the development work is done, it's deployed to a QA environment. They go through a week of basically regression testing, making sure there aren't any bugs or defects that are popping up because due to the new deployment.
Hmm.
And so after that point, we try to deploy on a kind of a slower business day because we really can't have our main product, which helps dealers service these leases, we can't actually have that out of commission during certain business hours because obviously there are peak hours. So we try to do that on Tuesdays and we work with the offshore dev team too. So we try to do that at 3 or 4 in the morning on Tuesdays every 2 weeks.
Yep. The healthcare company that I worked for, we had our claims application, claims and enrollment application was a major chunk of work. It was an old COBOL behemoth, and when we were working with the state government, they mandated that our systems be available 24/7, and we had to really fight with them to get an exemption to be able to take the system, to say that the system wouldn't necessarily be online 24/7. We got, I believe it was a 4 hour window on Sunday morning from like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. or something like that, because the online system was intended to allow externals, customers, clients, actually members, to be able to access information, and the state's requirement was that information be available to members 24/7. So there are
That
sometimes.
sounds like a real challenge. Even, I mean, if I'm thinking about, companies that work on stock market apps and people who need that kind of data on a kind of a
Yep.
live basis, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. A lot of companies have done failover systems. Basically, they run parallel systems so that they have two instances of everything that's going, and when they're updating, they shut down one, migrate over to the other.
Oh, that's neat. Okay.
It's neat, but when you're talking about multi-million dollar software implementations, I mean, the system that we were working was huge. We were running on originally it was on an IBM. It was an AS 400, and that was in the way back when it was small. It was a much bigger platform, and to think about the idea of having two of those platforms running 24/7 was a bit of a challenge. It was an interesting circumstance because that allowed us to have an immediate disaster recovery setup so that we never really had to do disaster recovery because the systems were running completely in parallel. The information was being transferred between the two systems in parallel, and one of them was in New York and one of them was in Florida. So the two systems were working side by side basically, and so it was a plus and a minus, but it's an expensive proposition to have that kind of hardware and software running in two instances uh,
For
solely
sure.
so that you can keep things running 24/7. But that's what it's about. The fact remains, though, that there are a number of organizations where there are constraints on being able to make updates to a production environment. And so what happens in the Agile framework there is that the the shorter increments, the time boxes, the sprints, are done on this shorter basis, the 2 week basis, and then that the results of those sprints or the results of more than one of those sprints are aggregated into a more realistic production increment. But it still remains that the idea of the whole agile thing is to break things down into smaller pieces so that they're done in smaller chunks so that they can continue to be verified and validated so that when the product increment goes to production, everyone knows it, everyone is basically somewhat comfortable with it, familiar with it, and it makes the transition a little bit smoother for people. That goes back to the idea that, again, what Agile is seeking to do is to define things according to what will be valuable for the end user, for the customer, and planning things to develop and deliver the pieces of the product in a stream that maximizes that value being available to the customers. The other point on this slide, which is interesting, is that Agile, and this particularly speaks well to IIBA's take on Agile, is that it's really not necessarily something that is restricted to software development. It is the kind of thing where, in order to be an Agile business, you need to be looking at things constantly and consistently. Business is changing so rapidly in virtually every environment that you need to be able to respond to change. You need to be able to be moving quickly, and the underpinnings of Agile, the things that Agile seeks to focus on and stress, are the kinds of things that can be valuable in any sort of project type environment. Okay. This is interesting. This is a really nice graphic on the right hand side of the screen. It speaks to the way the IIBA perceives of the idea of development, the idea of building business solutions. And this is something that really makes a lot of sense. I mentioned yesterday that they break the process down into three what they call horizons. The strategy horizon, which is where major decisions from an organizational level are being made. The initiative level, which is the tactical choices of how that strategy will be achieved, and the delivery or operational aspects, which is where the final details and the specific pieces of the solution are really built. And the thing that they stress here, there are two things that they stress here, which is that in each of those horizons, there's a focus on feedback, learning, and decisions. And internally, that is an internal feedback loop where there's discussion and feedback and learning and decision, and the decision is feedback to reevaluate the initial the initial output, so that there's always that internal loop going on in each of the horizons, and then each of the horizons feeds to the next horizon, and it also feeds back, so that if you have a decision coming down from the strategy level, it feeds the initiative level. The initiative level has its internal feedback loop, and the initiative level feeds its information forward to the delivery horizon, but it also feeds its information back to the strategy horizon. And the same thing is true of the delivery horizon, where the delivery horizon feeds, because it's at the end of the chain, the delivery horizon feeds information back to the initiative horizon. And actually, there should be another arrow here from the delivery horizon going back to the strategy horizon, so that it's a continuous feedback loop. It's continuous reevaluation of everything that's being done, always focusing on what is the level of detail that we need and that we're interested in at this particular horizon. The other thing about this is really, it's kind of, although this looks like almost like a waterfall, it really should be the blocks should all kind of be the same size and in a stack with lots of arrows going back and around, so that there's overlap, is what I'm trying to say. The strategy horizon overlaps the initiative horizon and the delivery horizon. So maybe it would be that the strategy horizon extends all the way over to the right-hand margin. The initiative the initiative horizon extends over to the right-hand margin, and the delivery horizon sits at the bottom. Um, Now, another interesting thing about this is if you've ever seen the original diagrams of waterfall delivery, the waterfall paradigm, they look remarkably similar to this. And I think that that's one of the things that I've always had a kind of thing about, is that waterfall delivery is really, it's really one iteration agile delivery. It's that the process takes place. It's a similar, in many ways, a similar process, uh, but it just, instead of there being an iteration, a loop of iterations going through the process, it only travels down the path once. It's also very interesting that in its initial implementations, actually the waterfall paradigm included feedback loops, so that there are arrows in the waterfall diagram, which looks very similar to this, that really do feed back from one piece of the loop to the previous pieces of the loop. Those that has gotten lost in the translation of many years of doing development. But I think that this is a good diagram to keep in mind when you're thinking about Agile, about the consistent learning and feedback loops. And going back almost to the original principles of the Agile movement in with the manifesto, the focus is on inspecting and adapting, looking at what we're doing something, looking at something that we've done, assessing what we've done, and making necessary changes. It doesn't mean that we always have to be changing. It means we always have to be looking. And feedback at one horizon influences the decisions. That's all of the arrows going back.
Can you give any live example for all this?
A live example?
Yeah. So how did you did this strategy, initiative, and delivery feedback in one of your project?
Well, it's really looking at a project from the perspective of, and it's interesting because this has been always one of my problems with the way software development has been done, or was done, certainly in the organization that I worked for, which is that decisions about the strategy for the company are intended to be high level goals, that
Yeah,
at that horizon we're really talking about something like the organization saying we want to improve our sales by 10% this year.
yeah,
That's a quantitative goal for the company.
yeah,
Theoretically, there would be a question of, okay, we have this is our goal. We want to improve our sales by 10%. How will we improve our sales by 10%? Obviously, we need to sell more
yeah,
product. We need to sell more product. We need to make more product if we're certainly a manufacturing organization. And the process of selling more product, making more product, will have impacts across the organization to the various areas in our company. Could mean that we have to hire more people. It could
And
mean,
that's the feedback, right?
and this is taking the strategy decision and saying, what do we need to do within the company in order to achieve that strategy? Those kinds of things are the decisions that need to be made. They're the things that need to be considered, and those are decisions that start to go down into the initiative the initiative level. So as much as you could say, well, it would be an initiative to develop a new piece of software, or to modify a piece of software that exists, that we use in order to support the idea of increasing our sales. The same way we could say, from a human resources perspective, we may need to hire more people, which means the human resources people are going to have to figure out what they're going to need to do in order to hire more people. We may need more manufacturing capability, which means on a bigger level, we may say, okay, one of our tactical initiatives in order to increase our sales by 10% is to open a new factory or to buy an existing factory, uh, take over an existing manufacturing thing. And some of these decisions, obviously, the ones that I'm talking about, are much longer term, bigger kinds of things. But you can see where the strategic choice to say we need to increase our sales has a downstream effect on the way the company operates, the things that the company does. Those are going down to that level are the tactical initiatives that are going to basically result in the achievement of the strategic goal. That's that initiative horizon. And then going down into the delivery horizon, it is we've identified that, oh, we need to make changes in my healthcare environment. We need to make changes to our enrollment and claims processing application to handle a new product. So that at that level, it is a very detailed kind of thing, and we want to know exactly what changes need to be made and how the application is going to have to be modified in order to handle the new product. But all of that bleeds back to the idea that the reason that we're making changes in the claims and enrollment application is because we made a choice, a strategic choice, that we wanted to increase our market penetration. We want to introduce a new product into the market. Does that cover the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Agile business analysis focuses on maximizing business value. You're going to hear, certainly from me, you're going to hear value a number of times. Value is probably one of the key terms uh, that exists in the business analysis world at this particular point in time, and certainly in the agile uh, environment, where the focus is on the delivery, the creation and delivery of value. It's looking at how do we improve our business, how do we make things better, how do we earn more money. It's all about value. It's determining what is going to help us to increase our value and focusing on that with laser-like precision. That needs to be the underwriting or the underpinning theme for everything that we do. And certainly agile business analysis in and of itself being understanding how business needs to change in order to improve is really adding value. Now, there are other things that obviously that we're going to have to consider, and we'll be talking about those, particularly in terms of when we start talking about prioritization. But the one of the key drivers for all of this is business value. We've already talked about the feedback loops. That the idea of an agile environment is to break things down into smaller pieces so that we can get feedback about what we're doing. We can adapt according to the feedback that we get. We can modify according to what needs to be done in order to improve the solution that we're planning to deliver. And interestingly enough, this is another area where sometimes organizations fail to execute the way they need to, because having these feedback loops basically requires that you have constant communication between the people who are crafting the solution, the development or delivery team, and the people who are going to be using the solution, the stakeholders. It was for a long time, it's been very convenient for there to be a great divide between the business people and the development people. It was hard, difficult, if not impossible, to secure business resources who could be available to the development team on a regular basis in order to provide input, and that sort of fostered the waterfall development kind of thing. I can think back to my days in development and business analysis um, in my previous lifetime when I was really working for a company and doing this, where we couldn't get access to the business people who provided access to the development people were there in addition to their daytime job. So there were not people dedicated to say, how do we work with the IT team in order to get things done? It was like, who has the couple of minutes that they can spare to take out of their out of their day job in order to go and work with the IT people. And this is something that the agile paradigm really uh, can't exist that way. The agile paradigm really mandates that you have to have access to the people who are going to be working with and using your solutions in order for them to see what you're doing and provide feedback on what you're doing. I can remember, interestingly enough, in one of the projects that I worked with in the healthcare company, we developed an application to help our enrollment people. They were being audited, and we basically what we had to do was to build an application to re-verify all of the calculations that they had done for various applications for healthcare coverage. The state came in and said, we want to audit a sampling of your applications. You need to show us how you did all of the calculations for to determine these people's eligibility, and all of this was being done at the time on paper. Um, so there were financial calculations that needed to be done, those kinds of things, and in order to support this, in order to get it done, our CIO said we need to build these people a calculation app. So we did. We built the application in about 2 weeks, threw it together, and it was basically blood and guts. We just did the bare minimum, nothing nice, and gave them an application that they could use to recalculate several hundred applications. They did it, and they loved it. They were like, thank God, because doing all of this on paper with calculators would have driven us all crazy. They got that done, got through the thing, and the upshot of it was that, and then a couple of weeks after we put it together, they wanted to use this on a regular basis. They said there's no reason why we couldn't implement this, and they started to use it on a regular basis. And then they started to kind of, well, why doesn't it do this, and why does it do it this way, and what is this, why didn't it do this? And I went to them, went to the enrollment department at the time, and I said, well, look, this was a fast and dirty application to get you guys through the audit. We have no problem building a new version of the application. If you want a new version of the application and you want that version of the application to do what you want, the way you want it to do it, then you're going to need to be involved with me in this, because I don't know what you have to do. I don't know how you do your job. So if you want this to be, I'm happy to do the improvements. I'm happy to set this up. But if you need this done, you're going to have to work with me on it. And they kind of shook their heads and grumbled a little bit and said, okay. And the net result of that was several years of very close collaboration between me and my team and my area and the enrollment department, because we had basically said to them, we will do whatever you want as long as you tell us what that is. They got to the point where honestly they said they couldn't have a meeting to discuss enrollment things without having me there, because I knew as much about their job as they did. Um, and this is what we really want to see in business, is we want to see people from the development side, from the IT side, working closely with the people on the business side to achieve, because what the software development people are really developing is tools and solutions for the business people. If we don't know what the business people need, we can't, we have a less than, um, we're less than sure that we're going to be able to deliver it to them if we don't know what it is. Uh, so this is what the idea of agile business analysis is really about. It's being able to work with the your customers, your stakeholders, to consistently understand what they need and when they need it. This is also responding, allowing them to respond to changes that they are seeing that on the development side we would never see. They would be they are the ones that are on the front lines dealing with these problems. They are the ones that are having to do the jobs, and the goal is for IT to provide the tools for them to be able to do those jobs, not the tools that IT thinks they need to do those jobs. Okay.
Well, Tom, if I may interrupt here for a minute, you're exactly right. But the problems that I foresee or that I've been exposed to is that so many times these department heads, directors, C-suite, they don't know what they want or they know what they don't
Mm-hmm.
want. The last project, the last project I did with INL, they said, well, just and then it was building two different systems. One of them was very much procurement, and they said, well, we just want like Amazon. I'm like, oh my god. I'm like, you can't just say that. You got to say, I go, it's not that easy. Amazon has a whole town devoted to that website and that front end
Yep.
user experience. Uh, they have small subsidies. I go, for right now, I go, you have one quote unquote senior BA, Don Shields, and I mean that is I go, that's a long time. It's going to take a long time. I'm like, well, we know you just got here, Don, but we need to have something in 3 months. And I said, you guys are crazy. It's going to take longer than 3 months. So again, I know everyone here is more senior than me, which I'm definitely excited about. But it's also, having that cultural say, listen, do you know what you really want? Do you know what you don't want? Do you understand what my job or my role is? And, I'm just kind of a liaison between maybe the developers, DevOps team, and also all the other departments. It behooves you, just like you were saying earlier, we have got to sit down and meet, and we've got to quote unquote interview all the stakeholders, quote unquote get all this feedback just to kind of get some kind of framework around what we do and don't
Mm-hmm.
want. That's
Tom,
been go ahead.
no, go ahead, Don.
Oh, I was gonna say, and that's been my biggest struggle is, like I'm not a know-it-all here in terms of what you want. I can't read your mind. It's dangerous to guesstimate what you want. That could cause more problems, or it's going to take longer. And people are just sometimes, again, only in my experience, they just seem reluctant to, or their expectations are so high or so out of whack that they're like, no, this isn't just a 1 hour meeting. This is going to be, several, maybe if when you put it all together, several business days, spaced out, meeting with everyone and collaborating and getting that planning and elicitation going, just to do a wireframe. And that's been my biggest struggle is just expectations and people maybe not fully understanding what they're asking for. And I know that may not is directly to the AAC class here, but I definitely can relate to your
It's
story.
definitely relevant. Ingrid, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say one real quick thing. It's just the same from way back when, and we experienced it, all of us as BAs, and then I won't take up a lot of time. We all experienced it, I think, as BAs over time. It's called Cadillac Mindset, Toyota Pocketbook.
I like it.
Pretty funny.
That's what most of our clients are like. When you said the Amazon thing, I was like, oh yeah, they want Amazon type
Yeah.
stuff, but they don't want to spend for it
Yep.
either because it's going to
Well,
take, like you said, a
that's
long
true.
time.
We're not even talking about financial aspects. They're just like, well, I
Right.
just do that. And I'm like, okay, I need about 50 more BAs and another 70 PMs, but we'll get it to you. And oh yeah, you better get
Yep.
that checkbook out because it's going to
Well,
cost you.
you know,
You know, and they ended up going with Oracle to outsource the systems. And I told them, I said, look, I'm not trying to tell you guys what to do, but that's a minimum $4 million you're going to spend going with Oracle. Minimum, if not more.
yep.
So anyway,
Yeah, I think what I was going to,
but I can relate to what you guys are all saying because I'm just like, I just don't think they have a real true understanding of all the variables that go into play or can potentially go into play just off one request for an app to do a
Yep.
calculation. You know,
And that's why we need to be good BAs and teach our
yeah,
clients.
I think that, and this is something that I have long felt. The whole idea is that in some cases, them not knowing what they need or what they want, you could make a case for that. You could say, okay, that I have to somehow live and work with that. The problem with that is, and Don, it's certainly what you alluded to, if not really set out, is that they don't understand that in order to get there, they're going to need to invest of themselves. I don't, I have no qualms with a business user coming up to me and saying, I don't know what I need. I don't know what I want. You need to build me something. I accept the idea that they're going to look and say, okay, when you show it to me, I'll let you know whether it's what I need or what I want. But that involves time. It involves feedback. I'm not going to get it right unless, you know, lightning strikes my brain and I have this fantastic vision that just happens to mesh with
no,
yours,
you're, you're absolutely
you
right,
know.
Tom. But you know, when they like, hey, could you build this app to just do a simple paper and calculator calculation? You're like, okay, and like, so we'll see you in 2 days. Like, well, no, it's going to take a little bit longer. You know, that's where the expectation I feel is out of whack because they think that there's nothing else going on, and you know they've already got 500 projects going, small, medium, large, whatever the case may be with the DevOps teams, and it's like, well, that's going to take some time. Okay, 2 months. Well, actually, you're talking about building two different systems here. One for procurement, and the other one was with the hazardous materials. I was working for the Department of Energy, and that's going to
Yep.
take
Yep.
2 years minimum. And that's if we do most things right the
Yep.
first time. But you're right. You got to understand, or how can we behoove them or trick them into saying, look, you're going to have to take, I'm going to have to take a lot of your time. And it's going to put your work behind a little bit or potentially. And I think that's when they get turned off because they said, well, it just seems so simple. I'm like, well, it's not that simple. You know, it's not a turnkey home here. You know, it's you're kind of building the home or building the car from the ground up. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll shut up.
I have two little amusing sidebars that are kind of way out of the uh, the scope of business analysis, but they illustrate the same thing. There was a long time ago that I was dating a woman, and she was a very physical person. She was a dancer and a martial artist, and was very tuned into her body and how it worked and how it moved. And she could never figure out why I couldn't dance. I mean, because I have three left feet. She could never figure out why I couldn't dance because for her it was so simple. And we went back and forth about this a number of times. And I finally looked at her and said, okay, sing for me because I was a professional singer.
That's
And
awesome.
she kind of dropped her face and looked and said, "Oh." And we never had
Yeah. Oh, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to
exactly.
begin. But you
Yeah.
proved your
And
point.
it's the same thing. I had the same thing with my wife where I play pool and we used to watch, we'd watch competitive pool on TV and I could look at it and it looks very simple. It looks very boring. It's, it just seems like, oh yeah, okay, well they just shoot the next ball. And I know what it takes to make it look that simple. My wife had no idea, so one year for my birthday, she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to go play pool." So I took her and we went to the pool hall and I put her on the pool table and we played for a little while. And all of a sudden, she had this enlightening that what she was watching on TV was people who had spent an inordinate amount of time in an inordinate amount of focus to make something look very simple. It's the same thing with a lot of our business people. They just don't realize how much effort, how much time and how much money was spent in order for Amazon to build their website. They think, "Oh yeah, Amazon did it. Yeah, look, it's really easy. It's really straightforward, there's no problem here." Not realizing how much work has to go into making that happen. So as business analysts, we're always in the middle of that, always with the, it looks so easy, but it's really not. And I think business people don't necessarily kind of get that. Um, they kind of get it from their perspective, but not from your perspective. They understand their problems, but they don't understand your problems. And the challenge is to make that happen. And it's one of the things that is really great about the the increased focus on agile and the agile paradigm is the whole idea that in order for it to work, it requires a commitment from both sides. It requires consistent communication, consistent effort from both sides in order to be successful because that's what it's going to take. I don't know how you do your job. Unless you tell me how you do your job, I can't I can't even begin to think about how to build you a tool to do your job better, faster, more efficiently, more robustly if I don't know what your job is. And one of the techniques that we've used, and I mentioned this yesterday when we were talking about challenging people, when I said sometimes it seems like as a business analyst you need to challenge people, and you need to do that in a way that doesn't challenge their intelligence. You need to do that in a respectful way that says, you know what, I can't do this for you because I don't understand it. If I don't understand it, I'm going to do it wrong. So help me to understand what you need, why you're doing what you're doing, and then we can craft a tool for you that will actually help you do your job better. Anyway, the agile analysis, it's all about what the Agile Manifesto, the vision of the Agile Manifesto, the principles that underlie the Agile Manifesto. It's about how do we get to um, a working agreement, a working arrangement that will allow me to do what you need. We're going to see that the IIBA and Agile in general looks at things from two different perspectives. There is the iterative perspective, which is this one, and it's that we are going to be doing things in small chunks. We're going to break things down into smaller pieces, and we're going to do one small piece at a time, and then those pieces will be the building blocks that will allow us to put together a a more comprehensive solution. Uh, the idea being break it down into a smaller piece of time that we're working in, so that there's not as much likelihood that things are going to change within that small time period. As the cycle gets longer, the possibility of something changing gets greater. As the amount of work that's being done in a cycle gets larger, the idea that something is going to change or that something is going to be missed as a part of what needs to be determined is it also increases. So by breaking things down into rather small chunks, we can do them a little bit at a time and make sure that we get each one of the small chunks right, and then put them together. And at the same time, we're looking in terms of being able to get feedback from people. So if I do a small bit of work, I can show you the small bit of work and say, okay, do we have this right? Did we get it right? If we got this piece of the work right, okay, then we can move on and get the next piece of the work right. If we don't do that, we run the very severe risk of getting a big chunk of work done and finding out that something at the bottom end really wasn't quite right, and that something bled all the way through what we did. There's an interesting diagram that has been displayed for BAs for a long time. It's about the cost of um, discovering errors. And basically, what it comes down to is that it's an exponential curve. If you discover your errors when you're doing your analysis, when you're figuring out what you really need to do, they're relatively inexpensive to fix. If you don't discover an error until after you've implemented something, tested it, and deployed it to production, and people are using it in a production environment, the cost for fixing that error is exponentially higher than it would have been if you got it right in the first place. This is, of course, a balancing act because it's one of the kind of underlying principles of the waterfall paradigm, the predictive paradigm, where it says we need to know everything before we start building, because if we don't know everything and we build something, it will cost us more to fix it later than to understand how to build it. So it's a trade-off. You have this trade-off of, well, if I don't build anything, I will never really know if it's right. And if I wait to build something until I know everything, something is probably going to have changed, and everything that I've done is probably not going to be right anyway. So the goal is to break things down into smaller time chunks, smaller chunks of work, deliver those chunks of work so that they can be done and completed and people can use them and verify that they are continuing to do what they need to do, and that if anything needs to be changed, you're not rebuilding the entire building. You're kind of redoing a wall or redoing a window. You're not doing the entire building. If we put the wrong if we put the wrong windows in a building and we don't find that out until after the building is completely built, it's phenomenally expensive to replace all the windows. If we put a window in the building and we allow people to look at it and assess it and say, okay, yeah, this is the right window, then we know that we feel good about moving forward. That's the whole idea behind doing things in an agile way. And that's the whole thing about being iterative about it, doing it in small chunks and getting the feedback before you move on. The other side of agile is, in addition to being iterative, you need to be adaptive. You need to be constantly looking at things from a short-term perspective, a medium-term perspective, and a long-term perspective. And you always need to be willing and able to make changes. It's a little harder to make changes at the highest level, That's one of the reasons why it's important that strategy planning, the strategic horizon is handled well before you move down into the other horizons so that you don't get to the end and say, yeah, that's really nice and we really did what we were planning on doing, but it didn't deliver the benefit that we thought it was going to deliver because something changed somewhere along the line and our strategy was not appropriate. Uh, they're sure.
I just wanted to comment on this. I took the practice test, and this is kind of the area that tripped me up a little bit. They kind of asked about the iterative planning and the adaptive planning in kind of scenarios, and kind of asked which principle was being displayed. So the language was a little tricky there. Just thought to
Okay.
mention that.
Was that the IIBA's one? Is that the set of questions that are in the study guide?
They were actually the ones on the
Yeah.
adaptive site.
So those would be the ones that are actually in the adaptive study guide, and we could actually take a look at them and really dive into that and talk about those questions. So we'll find some time to do that. Keep that in mind so that we can do that for you. Uh, the
Great.
adaptive thing, and it's you know I mean, it really is. Agile is a combination of iterative planning and adaptive planning. It's breaking things down into smaller chunks and being willing to change. That's what it really comes down to. And it highlights the idea that business analysis is really something that always needs to be done. It needs to be done continuously, continuously and continually. Uh, it's a little bit easier to see that in an agile environment, particularly when you start to say, okay, the work, we're only going to do the analysis work for the work that we need to do in the immediate future and in the short-term future. The work that we need to do in the medium-term future and the long-term future are things that we don't need to have the full detail on. We can understand that this is one of the terms you'll hear is rolling wave, so that you're always doing a certain amount of strategic thinking and strategic planning. You're always doing a certain amount of tactical planning, and you're always doing a certain amount of operational planning and work. And that moves as a block continuously forward. You don't say, well, we did strategy last week or last month, so we don't have to consider our strategy because we did that last month. It's always, how does what I'm doing today, how does the product increment that I'm delivering today, how does that potentially impact my strategy? Does it have to change? It's a frightening thing for a lot of businesses. It's a frightening thing for a lot of businesses for a lot of reasons. Um, Not the least of which is that it's hard for them to be adaptive. People at the higher levels of business think, I made a decision, therefore it shall be so. And it shall be so isn't necessarily true anymore. People need to understand that I hope it will be so, but if it's not so, then I'm going to have to do something about it. Adaptation, again, focusing on the idea that we need to be constantly looking at what are the benefits and the value that we're deriving from the work that we're doing. And we need to always be willing to say, this is not providing us any benefit. This is not increasing our value. It's time to change, or it's time to stop. One of the things that you'll see in terms of doing agile project development is the idea that an agile project is over when it doesn't deliver any more value. When the project team says, you know what, we don't need anything more. We've gotten all of this. We've gotten everything that we want um, from this body of work. We don't need to do any more work, or sort of a variation on that. The cost to continue to do this work is not worth the value that we will derive from it. we've looked at it and we've said we're not going to make any more money out of this. It's going to cost us more to do it than we're going to make from it. So that's a simplified way of looking at it, but that's what we're doing. We're looking for can the can the organization continue to accrue value? Okay. How do we do that? Well, this we've already seen some of this. Um, we break things down into smaller pieces so that we have iterations that are manageable in their time and their workload. Prioritizing things by business value, always saying, what is this going to do for us? How is this going to help us? How is this going to make things better? Um, break that down. And the combination of doing things in small chunks and constantly focusing on the idea of doing valuable work, we want to deliver that to our users, to our customers, our clients as rapidly as we possibly can. Again, I mentioned earlier that because of the nature of the way business environments operate, it's not always clear that you can simply do continuous integration, uh, continuous delivery of business value. Sometimes you do have to break that down into or aggregate that up into bigger chunks. And the idea is to work with your environment to say, what's the most reasonable chunk of product that we can deliver given our mode of delivery.
Ton, can you give an example that okay, how your feedback from initiative or delivery level changed the strategy?
Oh, can I give an example of how? I don't know. Does anybody else want to jump in with a quick example? Do you have a quick example? I'll think.
What was the question?
How does feedback from the initiative level, from the tactical level, impact on the strategy?
Uh, I can stab with an analogy.
Yeah, I think what he's looking for is kind of a practical example, and I'm think,
Oh yeah, not off the top of
yeah,
my head. No.
I'm trying to think of how our initiatives really, really kind of worked in on some of the things that I've done. Uh, it's I guess the what I would say from a
I think maybe I
sure.
could jump in here, Tom. So, one of the examples I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So, in the initiative horizon, I'm thinking you're probably breaking your product, your product down to epics or something of that nature. So, once you're doing that, say your customer needs you to build a calculator page for some reason. You're breaking it down into an epic. You realize, oh, wait a second, there's a lot more to this epic. There's actually the whole other functionality we need to build in with the calculator. That kind of feedback would probably feedback to that kind of feedback from the decision you've made in the initiative horizon would feedback to the strategy horizon. And then I guess a decision would be need to be made whether that other story or that other epic needs to be worked on or not. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also theoretical. I wanted a practical example.
Okay, I can think of one really that is probably relevant and probably addresses what you're talking about. And this goes back to the calculator page that we had put together. We had built this application, and it was a core piece of our enrollment processes, and they wanted more, and we were all you know kind of in line to do more. And then we discovered that there was another. It was I don't want to say it was a competitive product. There was another software development environment or another software development organization that had actually built an updated version of what we were considering doing and had it available. And the question then became for us to strategically say, do we continue on with the application that we've built and try and enhance that application, or do we reassess our strategy and say, you know what, we're really better advised to buy these to buy the solution from this other organization and work with them to enhance their solution, deal with their solution um, in our environment. And that was actually the choice that we wound up making. We said, you know, these guys have done this. Actually, it turned out that our application was suitable for internal usage. Their application was web-based and suitable for going out into the field. So there was a huge benefit to being able to make their to buy their application and make their application available to our staff in the field. For us to do that would have been an incredible nightmare. So there, something that we needed to do, which was to enhance the application. And one of the reasons, by the way, why the application needed to be enhanced is that the requirements from the state level were continually changing, or not continually, but every year there were changes. And so every year the application had to be tweaked in order to accommodate the changes from the state. And it got to the point where, you know, we had this choice to make. And so we went back and assessed the strategy and said, you know what, it's nice that we spent all of this time and all of this money to build this application, and it really did a lot of good things for us. It pointed us in the right direction. But now here's a product that we can buy to replace this, to replace that solution. So I think, does that kind of address the question that you were asking? Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And it's,
Thank
you
you.
know, I mean, it's why companies do beta releases. It's why companies put out, you know, initial versions of a product, because expose they want to expose their new efforts to the marketplace to see if it's worth continuing to develop or to push a new product. Um, I I can't think of any specific examples, but I know there are examples where a company has put out a new product into the marketplace and found out that the market just wasn't having it. Nobody was going to buy this product, and rather than investing huge amounts of money in trying to market the product and convince people to buy the product, the decision at a strategic level was, well, that was a mistake. Let's cut our losses and run. Let's not spend any more money trying to make this work when we can see, given our initial results, that it's not going to work. That's what we're looking at. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at. Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Uh, the key thing from this slide, uh, that if you wanted to focus on one bullet, is the middle one. There's no one size fits all approach. Every time you work on a project, no matter what framework you're using, if you're going to be truly agile, you need to look at what you've done, what you need to do, and what you're planning on doing, and say, are we doing it right this time? It's always about this time, because that's the only project that really matters. When you're working on a project, the only project that matters is the one you're working on. You can't say, well, we did it this way the last time, so we'll just do it this way this time, without saying, will the way we did it the last time work this time? And it's really kind of, again, kind of fun and interesting that uh, there's so much, you know, people talk about agile being adaptive, uh, talk about, you know, looking at what you've done and changing things, and yet there's so much focus on, are we doing it according to the Scrum guide? You know, are we following the playbook? And we're really missing the idea that if we're truly following the playbook, the idea is that the playbook can and may need to be constantly changing. So so we've kind of backed ourselves into a corner of refusing to be adaptive in order to be adaptive. So that one size, the no one size fits all approach. Um, I actually used to very often in my working career say it's not one size fits all, it's one size fits none. Anyway, and techniques from both planning approaches can be used together. Here they're focusing on adaptive and iterative. I would argue and probably make a strong argument that you can take you can take elements of adaptive and iterative planning and you can combine them with elements of predictive planning so that I could easily see a hybrid approach that says there's a certain level of information. Uh, I'm thinking in terms of like infrastructure kinds of things where we have to get the infrastructure right before we can start to build tools on top of it. And perhaps it's worth taking the time to say we need to do the infrastructure work, the architectural work in a more predictive way. That may kind of shift our planning for our project so that we're not going to just jump off jump off the cliff and hope that we get it all right, but that we can take a certain amount of time and say there are fundamental things that have to be in place and right that we can't go anywhere without. So in those senses, you would want to do things in a more predictive manner. You might want to have a predictive type project to get the infrastructure in place and then say on top of that, we can start to build as we start to build on that infrastructure, we can do it in a more iterative and adaptive way. There's a you'll find some people who will accept that. You will find other people who won't accept that, who actually, and I've had debates with some of those people about the idea that building a rocket to the moon should not necessarily be an agile project. And the hardcore agilists have said, why not? That there's a way that they could do building a rocket to the moon as an agile project, and maybe they could make a case for it. Maybe it's that the building of the rocket can be done in an agile way, but the rocket doesn't have to be launched until it's completely finished. I suppose you could make that argument. So,
What's your view on that?
so it's the idea is that over the entire spectrum, we need to be constantly thinking and saying, what is the best way to do this? If that's predictive, if that means we need to take the time to do it in a predictive way, that's fine. If that means we can break it down into small chunks or smaller chunks than it looks like and do it iteratively, that's fine. If it means we have to change things, we have to be ready, willing, and able to change things relatively quickly, that's fine. It's all about what is going to be the best way, what works right now. One of my favorite things about being a business analyst is that the answer to almost every question is it depends. That's an immediate thing that if somebody asks you a question, there's a good likelihood that if you think about it for a while, you could legitimately answer it depends.
I think that might be my product owner's favorite words.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
When the business doesn't want to hear that answer.
I No, they don't. And you need to be able to back it up with why does it depend? What does it depend on? But the initial answer when somebody asks for a question off the top of off the top of your head, uh, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to provide an absolutely correct answer immediately for anything that has any significant level of complexity. You know. Okay. Continuous feedback. Here's another thing that we're going to see a little bit further going forward. The italicized words minimize waste. That's going to be one of the things that we're going to be looking at. It's one of the things that Agile seeks to do. It's one of the things that sometimes is going to be a little bit difficult to convince people that by doing things in this iterative, adaptive way, we're not spending more time, we're spending better time, that we may have to redo things, we may have to rework things. That's part and parcel of the whole idea of adaptive feedback loops, changing things. People have a tendency um, to not realize that things need to change. It's, I can think of and see times when I've done something or I've seen something done, and it turns out that that was not the right thing to do, and people don't allow for that. They don't allow for that possibility of mistakes. We had the CEO at the healthcare company that I worked at used to say that mistakes were treasures, and that's something that a lot of people have said over many, 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 many years, that mistakes are the way we learn, mistakes are the way we get better, mistakes are the way we improve. And I used to shake my head and say, mistakes are treasures, but we don't have time to make mistakes. And that seemed to be the reality, was that everybody wanted to say, well, this didn't work out quite right. What can we learn from this? And instead, it was, this didn't quite work out right. Why did you do it wrong? That's a very dangerous and tough place to be. Oops. Can you guys still hear me? Because I'm hearing that I have network connection issues potential.
Yeah, you're breaking
It's
up.
going, yeah, it's
Oh
going in
dear.
and out. Sometimes it sounds like you're an electric robot underwater.
Yeah,
Oops.
exactly.
Sorry about that. If it does, and you want me to try again, I'm happy to try again. Mm.
You come back after 2 or 3 seconds, but for those 2 or 3 seconds, yeah, it's underwater robot.
And it's too bad that I can't really, I can't really listen to myself. I'd get major feedback if I could hear what I was doing. Yeah, I think that's something that somebody's going to have to invent, that you can plug in a headset into your computer that will allow you to hear what you're saying instead of, you know.
Look at you being a business analyst about how the audio is working on GoToMeeting.
I don't know.
You have 2 days
Yeah,
to build it.
we needed it yesterday. Yes. So we will talk about minimizing waste. And again, a lot of this stuff, it's kind of very repetitive. There's not an awful lot to it, and it is very repetitive, but it's so critical. It's so much about, you know, prioritization. You're going to hear prioritization forever and ever and ever, and people are not necessarily good at prioritization. Certainly, I'm sure every one of you has been in an environment where you wanted to prioritize requirements and the priority was high. Just the nature of the beast. It's always high. You know,
Exactly.
I have said to people, and they don't get it when I say it. I've said to people, well, if everything is a high priority, then nothing is a high priority. And they just don't understand that There's a reason why we want to prioritize things. There is a need to prioritize things. You can't say, well, we just need to do it all. It comes down to, to take this into a gruesome kind of way, you can't save everyone. Who do you save? And that is a question of prioritization that nobody ever wants to face. Nobody wants to face it in a software environment, let alone in an environment where people's lives are on the line. But that is the reality. There are times when a choice has to be made that says something can't get done. Something is not going to be able to get done. And I need to be able to say, from my perspective as the person who's kind of going to be impacted and who's going to be footing the bills and who is going to be suffering the consequences, I need to be the one that makes that decision. I need to say, this is what I can live without. Very hard thing for a lot of people, particularly in the software environment. Don, to your Amazon thing, it's like, well, of course you can build Amazon tomorrow. I mean, look, Amazon has it, so you can do it tomorrow. That's something that we're gonna run into. Uh, so if you've got prioritization, you've got minimizing waste, and part of minimizing waste is understanding what waste is, what constitutes waste. There are things, there are a lot of people who thought that uh, Agile was going to be wonderful because Agile said we don't need documentation. Documentation is a waste. And then people have had to deal with, but I'm in an environment where I have to be able to prove to somebody to document for people what I did. And even if I'm developing in an agile environment, if I'm developing in an agile environment, which is a heavily regulated industry, to wit, the banking industry, the healthcare industry, I'm going to have to be able to provide documentation to somebody who can control whether or not I can continue to do business. So in that case, producing documentation is not a waste. It's actually a critical part of your project. Those are the kinds of things that people need to understand. And then increasing custom.
There's one thing I
Sure.
want to interject. I'm sorry about documentation. So one of the things that I have run into is, and I'm hoping that you can clarify for us, is that with Agile, there's less documentation. Like so, and I think that where that comes from is that when people are thinking waterfall, there's a lot of documentation at the beginning because you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
grab things. And and it's not true that there's not a lot of documentation because what I've seen is that from waterfall to agile, it's just a difference in how the documentation is done. Whereas with waterfall, you're doing requirements and actual requirements document. In agile, you're doing user stories, and there's still documentation because in the user acceptance criteria, there has to be like all that detail
You
for the
you
developers to
are
develop.
so right. You are so right. The 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 big difference that I see with it is that waterfall documentation is in one place. Agile documentation is a part of the project. I mean, agile
Okay, good.
documentation, you could say, it's like looking at, uh, do your developers document their code when they're writing code? Do they document their code? Is their code commented correctly so that somebody can open up a piece of code and say, okay, I can see exactly what this is supposed to do and how it's supposed to do it because there is this information within the body of the code that tells me what they're supposed to do. Your user story example is spot on. Uh, you don't just write a one sentence user story and say, okay, over and done. That's all. Don't care. There's all of the underlying detail that needs to be captured someplace. And maybe it doesn't need to be captured in a monolithic document, but it needs to be somewhere and available so that people can access it. This speaks very highly to things like requirements repositories, or certainly a tool like Jira, where you can aggregate information about what you're working on into small chunks. You could, and I've seen it done, I've done it myself, where you can have a requirements repository where things like that are aggregated and they're available, and then because somebody needs to see it, you extract it all out and you put it into a monolithic document somewhere that nobody can read. But the idea that you don't need to produce any documentation in an agile environment is a fallacy. Um, the key, and again, it's the way people misinterpret the Agile Manifesto. Nothing in the Agile Manifesto ever said we don't need documentation. All it said was we do need working software. That we're not going to get any documentation is not going to help us to do. Middle of that sentence, I said you don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Documentation is not going to help us to do our job. And that I'm speaking from a customer perspective. From a developer's perspective, documentation or knowledge of some sort is going to help me to do my job. It's necessary for me to do my job. It may not need to be written documentation. It may not need to be copious amounts of written documentation, but I do need the information somewhere. Somehow, somewhere, I need that information. And so, no, documentation is something that it exists in Agile. And then feedback. Feedback can come from a lot of different places, a lot of different sources. You do need, obviously, you need your customers or the people that you are developing a solution for provide feedback. Competitors, this is again going back to my story about my calculator and my calculation app. One of the things that we had was looking at the solution, and there were actually at the time there were a couple of solutions that were out there that we could look at, looking at those solutions and saying, how do those solutions compare to what we have and what we want? This is feedback for us. I mean, competitor feedback was very significant factor for us in determining that we were not going to continue with our application, that we were going to implement the application that we were going to be able to buy. Partners, obviously, if you're working with people, you're working closely with people, you want to pay attention to their opinions on how things should be done or how things could be done. Obviously, investors, SMEs, yeah, they should always be feeding back on your applications, on your solutions, and obviously regulators, external people who have ultimate control over your continued ability to do what you do. You better pay attention to their feedback. Not paying attention to their feedback can be a real problem. Okay, Agile Business Analysis. Boy, this is interesting. This slide deck. I thought this was a brief one. It's not a whole lot of slides, and we've been on it for an hour and a half already. I think we can probably finish this one up before we take a break. We may wind up only taking one break today since it's almost 11 o'clock. We'll see. Agile Business Analysis activities. What we're doing, we're as a practitioner, as a business analyst, we need to be the one that has somewhat of a holistic view about all of this. And this is true in the waterfall environment, true too. It is part of business analysis that BAs tend to be in the middle of things. BAs tend to be able to see things from the perspective of the people who are in the trenches doing the work to build the solutions and the people who are ultimately going to use the solutions. And I would add to that the people who are making decisions about those solutions, so that as a BA, it's legitimate for you to be involved at the operational level, at the initiative level, and at the strategic level. And I would argue that in the traditional waterfall environment, where most BAs are considered to be project analysts, BAs are not involved nearly as heavily as they could or should be in those more tactical and strategic decisions. That's an unfortunate reality. The only thing that I can say about that is that as a good business analyst, you want to at least be seeking out that knowledge and trying to get that knowledge if you're not involved with developing and working with or toward that knowledge. You want to be sure, and I've said it's one of the things that is so nice about the agile environment and the agile perspective that the IIBA brings to this is that it makes a very strong case to tie these together to say that you can't really do effective operational work unless you understand what the corporate strategy is. And so it makes a very strong case for tying all of that together, and I think that is incredibly valuable. I can't even tell you how many projects I've been involved with where nobody outside of the C-level suite has been able to ask the question, why are we doing this, and get a good answer. We were lemmings. On the IT side, we were lemmings that if somebody said do this, the answer was okay, and there was no question as to why we were doing this. I'm reminded of one of my favorite BA stories, actually, again from my background. I had an analyst who came in and started working for me, and we were consistently developing reports for one of our departments. Uh, and it would be every month they would ask us for a different report. And he finally looked and said, why are we writing all of these reports? And he went to these people and he said, why are we producing all of these extracts, writing these reports for you? And they said to him, well, we have to review these reports and then we have to hand them off to the medical management department so that they can open cases to monitor these members. And he looked at them and said, is there any reason why we can't craft a solution that allows us to feed this information directly over to the medical management department? And they said, no. And so we eliminated a whole bunch of work that we were doing on a consistent basis, made a whole bunch of people a whole lot happier because they could look at the outputs from our solution, do a quick do a quick review and hand them off to the medical management department. We never quite got it to the point where we could develop a solution that would actually open the medical management cases, but that would have been a legitimate follow-on to this, thereby eliminating a whole lot of work for a whole lot of people. And they were all happy, and it was because this one analyst stood up and said, why are we doing this? So as an analyst, that's the kind of value that you can bring to this. And in an agile environment where if you adopt what the IIBA says about it, where you focus on tying together your strategy with your tactics and your operational efforts, uh, you're going to be ultimately more successful, or your organization is going to be more successful. And obviously, as an analyst, we're always involved in helping people to understand um, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what it's good for. That's key to successful projects, is having everybody who's involved understanding and having a common understanding, and that's a theme that you'll hear a lot from the IIBA about business analysis and certainly agile analysis. Again, in being a business analyst in an agile environment, you're looking for sources of value. You're looking for people who are going to be impacted by what's going on. And this is true. I mean, it's true in the waterfall environment too. I'm sorry. This is not specific to agile analysis. It's business analysis. It's good business analysis. Who are we doing this for? What are they going to get from it? Who can help us do it better? Who else might be impacted by it? I don't know. I would challenge any of you to tell me that that's not true of any project that you've worked on. That those are not questions you should have asked. Even, again, looking at the second bullet on this chart, helping stakeholders make decisions. That's what business analysts do. It's not specific to, oh, I'm an agile business analyst, so I help stakeholders make decisions. I'm a business analyst. That's what I do. And if we're successful at what we do, if we're successful at what we're doing, we'll create or help to create in our organizations an environment where people can be creative because they're allowed to fail. They're encouraged to fail. They understand that the only way that we're going to find out if we did something right is to ask someone if we did it right, to do it and ask someone if we did it right, and accept the fact that they may say, we did it wrong. Okay, well, I'm not perfect. You know, better that I should acknowledge the fact that I did it wrong and work to get it right than that I should try and somehow convince people that what I did was really the right way of doing it. It's the mindset. It's that mindset of everything is not going to be perfect, and certainly everything is not going to be perfect the first time around. I just saw an interesting quote somewhere. I think it was on LinkedIn. It was on a LinkedIn posting where somebody said the most successful entrepreneurs are not the ones that have an idea. They're the ones that have lots of ideas because they're not afraid to fail. They try things. They say, okay, well, maybe it's this one, but if it's not this one, maybe it's the next one. And I can continue to be creative about these things and bring them to the table. Uh, that's some of what being a good business analyst is about. There's not only one solution, there's usually a number of ways that things can be accomplished. And ideally, as a business analyst, you would want to say, have we considered other options? Have we considered the possibility of something else? Have we considered the possibility of nothing? Doing nothing is always a possibility. Have we considered that possibility? These are the kinds of things that you can and should bring to the table as a business analyst. So we are, uh-oh, Don says the robot underwater. Let me see if it helps if I just move my microphone a little closer to me. I keep trying to get it out of the way so that I can not have it in the middle of the screen.
I don't want it to be an issue. I just was giving you some food for thought, for next week or the next time you do
Yeah,
this. That's all.
yeah. It's like you never know what's gonna happen. I'll take a look at this and see what I can see what I can come up with. Maybe it's just a different headset, different set of things, but I don't know. Anyway, we're basically at the end of this module. We were going to talk about Agile Business Analysis, the principles of Agile Business Analysis, and a bit about Agile Business Analysis for practitioners. I think we've probably covered all of that. We've probably beaten a lot of it to death. Oh, I forgot my other slide. Um, Before we take a break here, going back to what we did yesterday, think about this in the context of um, not only did we cover what I thought we were going to cover, did we cover it? Did it help you with your objectives uh, for this course? Did it kind of foster changing any of your objectives for this course? And is there anything that you can take away from this particular module that says, yeah, there was a nice little nugget that maybe I should think about implementing in my day-to-day work? Just a couple of seconds there. Before I close away and we go and take a break, I mentioned LinkedIn, and I would encourage you if you, I don't think I'm connected with any of you all. I'm easy to find. Uh, Tom Tomasovic, I'll spell it for you. It's Tomasovic, just the way it sounds. Uh, if you if you search for me on LinkedIn, I'm easy to find. If you Google me, I'm easy to find. I think if you Google me, my LinkedIn profile comes up as the first. Yep, yep. So I'd encourage you to connect with me, send me a note, and just if you don't do it for a little while, remind me that you were in my class, and I connect with BAs anyway. Um, so I'm always happy to connect with more people, connect with more BAs. Okay, it is now 5 minutes of the hour, so I'm going to suggest why don't we take 20 minutes, which would put us at 11:15, and we'll come back and we'll take up our next module. Okay, I will